Our session, thank you. Today, our session is being hosted, our session is being hosted by UW-Madison Division of Extension. So I just want to take a minute, thank our session host for sponsoring our event and our speaker. We just have a few things that we need to go through before we get started into our series. The first is to acknowledge our funder. We are a Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, grant-funded program. We are a Health and Human Services Region 5, which covers Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, and Wisconsin region. If you're joining us from outside of that region, welcome in. We're happy to have you. We're happy to have everyone who is interested in our programming join us. We do virtual and on-demand education. We provide educational resources and materials, and we do technical assistance as part of our grant-funded projects. And we focus within our project on rural communities through extension programming within our partnerships. You see our website there. We'll be talking more about our website here in a minute, and we will also provide and make sure that you have our contact information later on in our presentation. So don't worry, we'll make sure that you have ways to contact us. Here's a quick look at one of our website pages. It's our resource library. We do encourage you to check our website out. It's one of our grant products, along with our newsletter. And we are now on Facebook. So please check us out. There are a number of different things on our website, up-and-coming news, updates, ways to connect our partners, as well as community toolkits and resource, videos, podcasts, supportive apps, anything that you're looking for. If you need it and we don't have it, tell us and we'll put it there. But make sure you check us out. It's a great place to look for the resources that you need and the partners that you're looking for across our region. The last thing I want to do is just take a minute to set the scene as far as being able to set that affirming. We use person-first language. Carrie's going to talk about what that looks like. It's a little bit different. If you've been on with our youth mental health and social success series, some of our other presenters have talked about that as well. Just a little bit of a language shift there. But in Great Lakes ROTA-RC, we talk about just making sure that we're using non-stigmatizing, recovery-oriented language, whatever that looks like for our audience. Overall, we want to help reduce that negative bias and promote successful engagement in treatment and recovery. And as always, we welcome you into the Great Lakes ROTA-RC virtual learning community from whatever space you're joining us from today. I just want to take a minute and welcome our presenter. Carrie Dunburn is the founder of LPC, Heart Consulting, LLC. She's an autism educator, author, 5-point scale. I'm going to let Carrie do a little bit more of her introduction, partially because I can't see the information because I'm doing all screen sharing. So I apologize to Carrie regarding that I wasn't able to do that shift. But she does a lot within Minnesota. She's the founding member of the Autism Project at the Minnesota Department of Education. She developed the Autism Spectrum Disorder Graduate Certificate at Hamline University. She's an advisory board member of the Autism Society in Trinidad and Tobago, and she's been an advisory board member in Minnesota. So I'll let her talk a little bit more about some of the projects and activities that she's doing as I hand it over to her to give our presentation today. We do have a lived experiences panel today, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like after Carrie's presentation.
As Carrie gets set up, why don't we do our pre-session poll? So I'm going to launch that. If y'all have been with us before, y'all know that we like to just figure out, like, where you are in your learning before our session. And we're going to repeat this poll at the end of our session too. Let me know if you have any problems or trouble accessing the pre-session poll. Okay, I'm going to end poll. Y'all can see where our results are right now. And we'll share the results later. Carrie, are you ready to share your screen?
Sure. Okay, I'm not sure. Should I just say, I'm going to press something here, which says this will stop other screen sharing?
Yeah.
Okay, there I go. You can see, okay. All right. Are we okay here?
Perfect.
Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and get started. If you could, I hope everybody can see my slides and hear me. And I just got over a cold, so I do apologize for clearing my throat from time to time here. Got some water, hope it helps. I'm going to be talking about a 5 is against the law as it was developed as a workbook, but also the incredible 5-point scale, which the workbook is based on. Before we get started, I would like you to think about somebody who has that you know or you work with that has difficulty understanding social boundaries. Someone who has difficulty with emotional regulation, and I'd like you to write their name down. Write it down. So it's kind of right here in your mind. And that way, as I'm talking about these different thoughts, ideas, and theories, I would like you to think about that person. And if you cannot relate what I'm talking about to that person, please ask afterwards or write it down so that you can remember to ask during the panel. Because everything I'm talking about is actually human as far as the human spectrum of social cognition, social thinking, social awareness, and social understanding. So everybody should be able to relate to the things I'm talking about. Whether you're working with somebody who has Tourette syndrome, if you're working with an autistic adult or an autistic adolescent, if you're working with a young child with any other developmental disability, you should be able to, if they have challenging behavior in any way, you should be able to relate to to what I'm going to be talking about today. So the 5 is against the law is a workbook, and it's based on the areas of research in social cognition, emotional regulation, and challenging behavior. And it's based on self-reports and the research in each of those 3 areas in education. Education and neuroscience education. So I will tell you who I'm citing when I'm talking about different areas, different studies and information that I've gathered that confirm the use of the incredible 5-point scale or the workbook. So the strategy, 5 is against the law, is based on the incredible 5-point scale. What I'm going to ask you to do as we go through this this afternoon is to rethink how you think about challenging behavior, learning, and how to respond differently to upsetting behavior. Behavior as it relates to social thinking and social cognition, social understanding and social self-awareness, behavior and social cognition as it relates to emotional regulation, energy regulation, the use of self-control, emotional awareness, and co-regulation. So these are the things that I'm going to be talking about as they relate to challenging behavior. And this is just a fun cartoon that kind of goes to the core of social cognition. Because social cognition is not something that we really thought that much about in education over 20 years ago, 25 to 30 years ago, research in the area of social cognition and neuroscience was just emerging. And so one of the early researchers in the area of autism, her name was Lorna Wing. And I remember her saying that she thought autism itself involved an absence of just social instinct, lacking of social instinct. And this is really an amazing statement at the time, and this was in the 80s that she said it, but it was also how abstract the idea was to look at challenging behavior and relate it to skills, cognitive skills, because really the research in the area of neuroscience had not emerged to the point where we were learning that there's a real connection between social understanding and social behavior and social problem solving. So in this, of course, in this cartoon, the dog is having to remind itself about how to look at that person or shake their hand and not to do anything socially inappropriate. So what is social cognition? I will be talking about that along with what does it look like and how does it impact a person's social development and problems across all populations, problems across the whole human spectrum. So the problems that I'm going to be talking about today, my research and my work has mostly been done in the area of autism, but I've also worked with individuals with other diagnoses, Tourette syndrome, obsessive compulsive disorder, and ADHD and depression. So I have worked using the incredible 5-point scale with all of these populations. And so if you, again, are thinking of somebody who you can't relate what I'm talking about to that person, please ask. So when you think about the development of social cognition and trying to think about it as a developmental issue with skills involved, you have to think about from the very beginning. Newborns already begin to exhibit behaviors that are believed to be the beginning of social cognition. And here you see a new father looking at his daughter, and she's only 4 days old, and already they are studying each other's eyes. It happens really early, and Ami Klin, who is a researcher at the time, he was at Yale and he's now at Emory University, but his research indicated that babies actually become addicted to eyes, that they get jazzed by looking in eyes, and that they seek out people's eyes because it feels good. There are actually hormones being released in their body that make them feel good. So they get addicted to eyes, and so they search it out. And in this way, Lorna Wing's work from way back in the 80s makes sense, because it would be like an innate ability and an innate skill that newborn babies begin to seek out. figuring out who their caretaker is, how their caretaker is feeling, and hopefully learn to predict how that caretaker is going to behave and respond. So all of that comes out of this very, very early eye contact with infants. Early development of social cognition, and you can find these in most of our educational research textbooks now in the area of child development. And these could include things like joint social pleasure, finding joy in interacting with a person, a responsive smile, you smile, the baby smiles, maintaining a social engagement with a coo or maybe a flinging of the arms to keep the interaction going very, very early, way before formal language is developed. Eye contact and joint social attention. And that would be, I look at something and appreciate it. You look at the same thing and appreciate it. We look at each other and we smile and we look back. We jointly appreciate this third object, and that's joint social attention. And these are the building blocks for social cognition, social thinking, and social problem solving. I'm going to show you a real brief clip of a 5-month-old baby. He is interacting with his grandmother. His grandmother is off camera. And you'll notice that the baby has very little body control, but he exhibits joint social attention. Definitely, grandma is important to him. And joint social pleasure, he's enjoying the interaction. And he actually follows a visual point prompt from his grandmother, which is part of that joint social pleasure and attention.
How's my Parker? Hi, sweetie. Hi, sweetie. Should we see what this can do? Look here. Oh, how about this one? What's he saying? What's he saying? How about this one? It's a frog. That one's a frog. How about this one? What do you think of that? What do you think? Should we see what's under here? That's the bird. Yes, that's the bird.
Okay, you can see all of those developmental milestones that I mentioned as being at the core of developing social cognition are all there. They emerge very early, and he can hardly maintain his body function, but he is establishing some very core developmental milestones in the area of socialization. Okay, so how does this impact a person's social development if they aren't acquiring these skills for whatever reason? And another cartoon, which is funny because it illustrates that we don't often think about behavior as being developmentally delayed. So I would share, but I'm not there developmentally. When we think about sharing and we think about the words that we use when somebody isn't sharing, it's likely to be kind of indicative of a character flaw as opposed to a developmental problem. So maybe we'll be saying he's not sharing and he must be selfish, he's rude, he's mean, he's self-centered. That our language kind of serves and treats it as a character flaw as opposed to a developmental disability or a developmental issue. So In this particular case, we don't often stop and think that that child who's not sharing past first, second grade lacks joint attention and joint social pleasure. And yet, in the development, the research in the development of social skills and social problem solving, that's a core foundational skill. An example of that might be that you work with somebody who doesn't seem to have valuing relationships with peers. You might want to just start by having an activity between that person and one other person around a topic or object that is valued by both. And just have that, practice that communication. Practice having interaction with another person and something that you value, that person values. I hope that makes sense. Dr. Ross Green, who's the author of The Explosive Child and a couple of other books since then that really talk to this issue well, said that the words we use to describe the behavior we see influences how we think and feel about that behavior. This is really, really important because how you think about behavior impacts how you feel about behavior, and that determines what you do about behavior. So it's so related that the words we use, how we describe it, really defines in our own brains how we're going to think and feel about and what we're going to do about the behavior. I think the information that we're talking about today is important to anyone who has a neurodiverse learning style of any kind or gaps in social problem solving. So if you're working with somebody in that area, hopefully you'll understand how significant the discussion is. Dr. Hobson said that the development of brain imaging is equivalent to Galileo's invention of the telescope, only we're now talking about inner space instead of outer space. And the research that I followed started with Dr. Schultz, Dr. Robert Schultz. And just so you know how recent, relatively recent historically this is, his research was really one of the very first neuroscience education as it relates to challenging behavior studies that there were involving the magnetic resonance imaging, MRIs. And his study has been replicated over 10 times throughout the last 25 years. He was at Yale University at the time, and he was doing research with the magnetic resonance imaging, MRI. And he had two groups of students, one neurotypical group of students and one group who at the time were diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome and were IQ matched to the neurotypical group. And he had the first group of students in the MRI scanners looking at pictures of things like a table, a chair, a bowl, and a particular part of the brain lit up. And then they had the autistic population go into the scanner as well, looking at the same pictures, and the same part of the brain lit up, and it lit up with the same amount of excitement and energy. And so theoretically, that meant that for these autistic individuals, the part of their brain that figured out things, tables, chairs, bowls, that part of the brain was intact and functioning well. Well, then he had the same group go into the MRI scanner and look at pictures of people's faces, emotions, And what he found was that a different part of the brain lit up for the neurotypical students. And that was the fusiform gyrus, which is a part of the brain. And it lit up when the students were in the scanner thinking about people and faces and those emotions. And when he had the Asperger syndrome group looking at the same pictures, the same emotions and faces, he found that the same part of the brain lit up for them as lit up for things. So theoretically, that would mean that this person was trying to figure out people and emotions with the same part of the brain as they're thinking about things. And tables and chairs don't change their mind. They don't have bad moods. They don't get upset. So this was a big deal. And if you think about who you're working with, and you think about that person possibly using a part of the brain reserved for thinking about things to think about you, or to think about the people they work with or their teachers. And you can see why that's confusing. And this confusion has been seen across many disability areas that involve challenging behaviors. So then, along with social cognition, I'm looking at emotional regulation. And the definition, the educational definition for emotional regulation really is the ability to control the outcome of one's own emotions. So it's not that they don't feel the emotion, but it's that they have the skills to regulate the outcome of feeling those emotions. So the focus here is on skill building. Looking at something that you might typically just look at getting rid of, and instead getting at the core skills involved in the ability to perform behavior in a different way. A lot of the research that is looked at today in this area educationally started back quite a long time ago with Daniel Goleman's work in the area of emotional intelligence. What he did was break it into 4 parts, skill areas that he felt were important for somebody to have developed good social, emotional intelligence. And that would be self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, and relationship management. And along with relationship management, I put co-management, so that co-regulation part of working with somebody who's not regulated socially. So poor emotional regulation may provide the simplest conceptualization for many socio-emotional and behavioral problems. And this was said by Carla Mazewski, and she and her research partner, Susan White, are more recent research in the area of neuroscience and challenging behavior. And when they looked specifically at emotional regulation and autism, they found that there are 7 skills that are involved with most people who have autism, and that those skills are directly related to the acquiring emotional regulation skills. So that would be having emotional language, the language of emotion, understanding concepts and the language of emotion, cognitive rigidity, poor social flexibility, that inability to, or that the hesitancy to be able to take on new ideas, flexible thinking, changing in midstream, transitions, lowering inhibition, the ability to lower your inhibition skills if you're in an overwhelming environment, problem solving, and abstract reasoning, difficulty reading social and emotional cues of other people, having a sensitivity to the environment, sensory issues, and then just biological predisposition, your ability, your resiliency, your ability to, or your natural arousal level being higher or lower. So what they said was that without these skills, one does not successfully learn how to control or manage one's own emotions, and that they should all be directly taught. So there you take Lorna Wing's work from the 80s, where she said that it seems like autism is a lacking of social instinct. And with this particular research, you can take that idea of social instinct and put it into, break it into skills that could be managed and taught. And that seems pretty simplistic or simple, but it is really quite new in education in the long run. So why use a number scale? Good question. Let's see. First of all, it is based on Simon Baron-Cohen's research. He's at Cambridge University, and his research is in the area of learning styles and preferred learning styles. And this is just the latest book that he wrote on this topic, The Pattern Seekers, about people who have a preference for systems and learning through systems and have a real problem learning conceptual emotions and social concepts. So think about how we teach behavior and social behavior. What we do is we use language. We teach with our language, and we use lots of social and emotional concepts and language when we're teaching it. Why did you do that? Well, why is really a hard one for individuals that have difficulty with emotional regulation. The why questions are incredibly difficult. So if you start taking those emotion concepts and put them into a scale, you can make them more concrete, visual, broken down, and easier to teach to somebody who has a highly systemized learning style. Instead of trying to teach the old way and banging our head against the wall because this person, that's not their learning strength. It's a weakness. So we're trying, and they desperately need to get this information and understand it. The other thing is, it's based on personal reports. Daniel Tammet wrote the book Born on a Blue Day. And he said, numbers are my first language and one I often think and feel in. I remember reading that for the first time and just being blown away. I would never have thought about thinking in numbers or thinking in colors about emotions, so that feeling in colors and numbers. But if this is the population that you're working with, you want to be able to understand, and personal reports are really important for us to understand what is going on when somebody has such a different learning style. Another fun cartoon. This little guy is talking about his favorite thing, which would be the dinosaurs, and he's talking about the Upper Cretaceous period and going on and on and on. And the other kid is looking at his watch and giving indications that he's not interested in this topic. Well, how do you teach noticing? How do you teach that the kid doing the talking to notice when somebody else is bored with their conversation or they're just not receptive to what you're saying? So these are not easy questions to answer. But if you put things into a system, it makes things like noticing easier to try to define. And the initial book is called The Incredible 5-Point Scale. This was my teaching partner and I wrote the book after using the scale for a number of years. And we've redone it 3 times, 2 different editions, and then this final edition, which is the second edition revised. So it's been used around the world, really, for the last 25 years. We've gotten incredible feedback, and there have been a few research studies that have been done by graduate students. But to my knowledge, I don't think there's been a big one done at this point, because typically what teachers and therapists will use as justification is that it is considered a cognitive behavioral approach. And that is a pretty highly researched approach. Well, this is where we started. There was a boy out in the hallway of a junior high school, and he was yelling in the hallway as he interacted with his friends. He was enjoying himself. He wasn't upset, but his voice volume was really getting high. And so I shushed him. I did the shush, and he just screamed at me, "Shut up, stop doing that." And so I went back to my room and I realized that shushing wasn't going to work, but B, he was real defensive about my shushing him. So I wanted to come up with something that would be, I could teach him in the classroom, that could be between him and me out in the hallway, that it wouldn't embarrass him or call attention to him. So we wrote a story about voice volume and just assumed maybe he's not aware of when his volume is getting too high or where his volume is. So we used 1 being no talking at all, 2 was that soft sort of library voice, the whisper. 3 was just a regular talking classroom voice. 4 was maybe yelling at your friends across the playground, outside, or at a ball game. And screaming was for emergencies only. So we wanted there to be some kind, because we wanted there to be some top and some, bottom of this 5-point scale, and then the different in-betweens. So we wrote a story about it, using different examples of voice volume. And then I gave him a little scale, and he had that in his pocket. And then I told him that I knew he didn't realize when he got up to a 4, and that when he's in the hallway, it really should be at a 3. So if I'm in the hallway and I see him, I'll just pull out my little scale. I'm just going to pull it out and show you. I'm not going to say anything, and I'm not going to say anything that anybody else will notice, but I'll just show it to you. And that way you can know that you're going up to a 4 and just go ahead and bring it back down to a 3. And that worked. So we took an old school behavior modification strategy, the shush, and we took it to a whole new world, a whole new level, really, by breaking it into 5 parts and teaching it in a really highly structured, direct way. Another thing that's really positive about the 5-point scale is that it leads to shared language, so that at home, if you do a voice using the voice scale as an example, at home, a 3 voice might be expected, but perhaps somewhere else, a 3 or even a 2 voice is required. So examples of maybe a 3 is okay before a religious service, but then once it starts, maybe you need to keep it at a 1. So that once you teach the scale, you can teach the use of the scale to home, community, job coaches, And everybody has this shared language of numbers. And they know that in this work environment, for example, really a 2 and a 3 are what is expected. So that you can, they're posted 2 and 3 at that job site so that they know that's what the voice volume is there, because they've already had a story about work and the voice volume scale. So you can write, you can create 5-point scales for almost any social or emotional concept or situation. And these are just some. Once you teach the scale, you can teach a second scale and just say, remember how we did the voice scale there with 1 through 5? Well, we're gonna do a touching scale. And I'm gonna write about touching and the different degrees of touching. 1 being no touching at all, and 5 being touching somebody in a dangerous or illegal way. So you can really once you've taught the system, you can teach any concept. It's really important that you keep it positive. It's a very important thing. That 5 is not bad. That 5 is simply wrong thing in the wrong place. And I need to identify to myself that I'm at a 5. I didn't realize I was at a 5. And thank you very much. I'll take a deep breath and try to bring it down to a 3. So this system is not a level system, although I've seen it used that way. That is not really what it's all about. Level systems have been around forever, and you earn yourself, you earn your way up a level system. This is not a level system because you're not earning your way. You are learning how to judge the different degrees of a social or emotional concept or behavior. It's not a reward and punishment system. You don't earn anything. You're teaching breaking that concept into 5 parts. So it's a teaching method, and it's a highly systemized teaching method. It's not exterior management. It really is not like me telling you that this is right or wrong. I am simply telling you that we'll have a story about that concept, and then I'll point out where on the scale you might be, or it looks like maybe you're feeling at a 4, which in emotion scale might be angry, and that person can then stop and think about that once they learn about that anger scale. I hope I'm not being too unclear, but let me use this example. What do you do when somebody swears? And when somebody swears, there are some common responses saying things like, that's not okay, or it's against the rules to swear at school or at work, or stop it, or don't do it. Pretty simplistic when you compare it to looking at the teaching skills approach. So here's an idea using a scale. This is a scale that was developed by students in middle school. Sweet words were number 1, just fine words were number 2, 3 hurtful words, 4 angry words, and 5 were threatening words. And what the teacher of this social skills group had found was that they were really, this group of students were confused by how their words made other people feel. And I have a little video of that, 2 of those group members going through their scale that they developed. And they can be quite blaming to each other. They can be quite blaming, but keep in mind that as instructors, as therapists and teachers and parents, we don't want to make it blaming. But as students, they've you know, things have been good and bad their whole career. So they are kind of blaming.
Okay, this is a preference scale of what happens when you get angry. We always start at 1. These are words that are sweet, words that actually make people feel better about themselves. Like, oh, I like your shoes, your hat, or something like that. Or like, oh, you look really nice today, or you're nice. This thing goes to, these are just fine words, like and okay, like it makes you a little mad, but you're still okay. Like hi, or like see you later. Like it's not really that bad, but it's you could do better. 3 are the hurtful words. Yeah, like you stink, or you're not nice, or these ones that make people feel upset. Like, yeah. Then we go to 4, which are the angry words. So these are the next worst, so they're really that bad. Yeah, like mean words like you're stupid, or like or when you start cussing people out. Yeah. 5 is when it gets real nasty. Yeah, like these, it's a little against the law, or like it makes them really mad, like you just want to hit them. Yeah, worst possible words, and 5 is actually the point where you do them. We put some these things. Examples. Number 1 is you are cool. So it's like 1 and 2 are good. We organize them like 4 and 5 are like bad, and 3 is okay, and 2 and 1 are good. 2 is hello, 3 is like you're ugly or something, 4 you're stupid, and 5 I'm gonna kill you. That's the worst possible words. Yeah. Then these 2 are what we call aggressive. This one's what we call passive, and these 2 are called assertive. That is all. Thank you.
Okay. What I hope you realize when you look at this is that rather than simply saying, don't do that, this teacher gave this topic of how your words impact how other people think as much time and effort as any other academic curriculum area, because this is the way we teach academics, right? We break heavy concepts into 5 parts and teach in structured ways. And that is what she did, rather than just dismiss it as a character flaw. Somebody who swears, don't do that. That's against the rules. Stop it. Instead, breaking the whole thing down, really adding more teaching and more cognitive understanding on the part of the individuals who are not using the skills needed to moderate their language in around teachers, parents, or other job coaches, bosses. Here's another scale that I really find very, very useful. And this is, I just call this one the check-in scale. And it's kind of meshed with the anxiety scale. I ran a camp in northern Minnesota for a number of years, and this is what we used in each of the cabins. We had one of these big posters, and we used clothespins with the names, campers' names on it. And we also gave clothespins to the camp counselors and had them rate themselves as well. So 3 times a day, everybody would rate themselves as where they are on this anxiety scale. And they'd check in 3 times a day. And if they rated themselves at a 3, then they would be offered a walk, because they would rate themselves in the cabins. And the cabins were pretty small, and there were 8 autistic individuals in each cabin. And autism is an anxiety disorder. So if you think about 8 high-level anxiety folks in one environmental space, that's where the majority of acting out and explosive behavior happened, in the cabins. So that's where we would check in. And if they rated themselves at a 3, they could go for a walk, maybe just talk to a counselor. If they rated themselves at a 4, then they really needed to take a serious break. Let's get out of the cabin for sure. And if they rated themselves at a 5, then they're ready to explode, or maybe they already exploded. And we had a place, we used the dining hall. There was an area, a couch area in the dining hall where we had books on tape, magazines about things that were enjoyable for the campers, puzzles, different things that are calming, self-calming activities. So anyway, what we found was shortly after introducing this, we had far fewer explosive events. And afterwards, the counselors would report how much they understood the nonverbal, subtle indicators that somebody was getting anxious. Just by doing this, then they would realize, oh yeah, you're saying you're at a 4. I did notice that you were getting louder and a little more confrontive at the last activity. So I'm going to watch that. And then when you get louder and confrontive, I'm going to just assume that your anxiety is going up. Okay. And that's when let's just go take a walk. Let's get away. Okay. We talked about that one. The idea, though, is to honestly and compassionately break down the issue into 5 parts. So I think the book, A 5 is Against the Law, is probably the ultimate example of compassionate honesty. I used the help of a gentleman, an autistic gentleman, who really went through the first book, the first workbook, and pointed out to me where, as compassionate as I thought I was, he gave me his perspective on the wording that I had for that particular issue or incident. And I changed the language that was used in the first printing of the book to the revised edition of the book based on his input. And I was surprised. I thought I had it down, but I didn't. I needed to think more about it. The other thing is to remember that if a person can begin to detect their internal state and interpret how they're feeling, recognize that when they become louder or angry at somebody, there are early signs in their bodies. And if they can begin to recognize those, they can possibly disengage with stressful situations independently and prior to losing control of their own emotions. It's a big deal. It goes to the heart of that, having language and for emotions, and also recognizing emotions in others and oneself. So think about how problems of social confusion could lead to legal problems. Just these examples here, how many times can I ask a girl to go out with me if she keeps saying no? There's really no written law about that one, is there? But when somebody gets older, it's a big deal. It is one of those lines that gets crossed and somebody gets scared. And when somebody gets scared of your behavior, you can get in trouble. Are guns a good topic to talk about with your teacher or your boss? There's no rule or even a law about it, but it's probably not a good idea. That's just something that maybe you can be taught directly, that through a scale that, the topic of guns, that could scare somebody. That could be, at least a 3.5. How long can you look at somebody before they feel uncomfortable? Well, if you're 5 or 6, you can probably look at somebody for a long period of time. If you are 36, it might be somebody might find it threatening, uncomfortable to the point of being threatening. And how close is too close? How do we know that? When you start walking towards somebody, you both kind of know where to stop. How did you learn that? Think about those really subtle social boundaries and think about, how did I know that? How did I learn that? Well, you learned it by observation, and that seems to be part of the learning disability involved in a lot of the developmental issues we deal with in behavior disorders. And not only how close is too close, but what about this? Can I touch somebody else's hair? It may sound kind of strange, but I have worked with more than one person who loves the feel of hair. And when they were kids, would kind of touch hair as, oh, I love your hair. Well, you get older and that is considered almost assaultive to touch somebody's hair. And approaches to supporting social conduct disorders typically do not address the need for direct teaching of social information and emotional regulation skills. So this is something that this information really does need to be a part of that discussion. And this is the workbook. It's not the all and end all, but it is, I think it really is a good starting place if you've got somebody who is particularly teen or young adults who are starting to step over that line of social boundaries and getting themselves into trouble. So it's a workbook about information concerning confusing topics that have caused problems for a lot of teens and young adults around the country and the world. And there are skills and activities to reinforce the information so there's one chapter will revolve around one story about one issue and one scale, and then some activities that go along with that particular issue. So how is it organized? First, it talks about what is a 5-point scale for the person that you're working with. Okay, so it does address that person, not the teacher. It talks about how a 5-point scale can help you understand social boundaries. And like I said, it's got the boundaries, social boundaries that are informal and all the way to a 5 where which would be a hurtful interaction or a threatening interaction. There's some information about how it changes as we get older. A lot of times, some of the students that I worked with that were younger would say, you know, I'm not going to go to jail for that. So just the whole idea in a concrete way, how they understand that social boundaries change as you age. And that, yep, there is a time when in fact it's going to change, and something that wasn't against the law when you were 8 years old is going to be against the law when you're 21 years old. It also involves restructuring, cognitive restructuring, and that's kind of, I always think about it as rethinking your thinks. So it really, a lot of times what goes into having a learning issue involving social cognition involves social thinking that isn't in line with typical thinking. So it helps to cognitively restructure thinking in that way. Again, cognitive behavioral approach and the cognitive restructuring is helping somebody to rethink their things. Let me give you an example. Brian is a really nice man. He's 25 years old. He worked in a t-shirt store where they put emblems and stuff on t-shirts. And they were having he had a crush on this girl, one girl. And everybody was having a discussion about what they were going to do for the weekend. And this was in Minneapolis. And there's a town not too far north of Minneapolis called Forest Lake. So just so that you know the distance, I would say that maybe it was, I don't know, 40 miles. It's hard for me to judge, but it's north of the Twin Cities. So Brian was listening to everybody talk about what they were going to do over the weekend. And the girl that he has a crush on, she talked about going to a wedding in Forest Lake that weekend. So that weekend, in Brian's thinking process, he decided that it was a good idea to go to Forest Lake and look for the wedding so he could see her in a social situation. And he did. And he got up to Forest Lake. He took his bike off his car and he rode around and found a church where they were having a wedding. And he sat on the steps and he waited for the people to come out. And they came out, and sure enough, she came out, and it was a friend of hers' wedding. And he was excited to see her. She was not excited to see him. He was confused because nobody else was upset that he was standing on the stairs. He didn't understand her thought process and how her thought process was different from everybody else's because nobody else knew that this was this guy that she worked with. Anyway, when they got back to work on Monday, Brian was called into his boss's office and was told that if he didn't leave this girl alone, he would be fired from his job. So Brian had totally misthought the whole thing, right? His intention was to see her. He liked her. Only time he ever saw her was in work. Here she was verbally telling everybody where she was going to be on the weekend. So he thought this was a good idea. But the outcome was devastating. Not only was his boss ready to fire him, but he was then embarrassed and felt like he'd been mistreated and misjudged. So it was unfair. So the whole idea behind having a structured teaching system is to try to teach somebody to how to rethink how they might be thinking about something. Oh man, I thought that was a 3. No, that word is threatening. So that's really a 5, not a 3. Swearing at a teacher and swearing when you're older is a much higher number right on the scale than swearing when you're in 3rd grade. So that also can be looked at and discussed through the use of the scale. This is just an example of the kind of worksheets that you can find in the book or in the even on my website. You can download this kind of thing for free. But it's like you decide what kind of scale this is going to be. Is it going to be an anxiety scale, an angry scale, a friendship scale? And then you take that idea and you break it into 5 parts. And then you're like, well, what does a 1 look like? What does it feel like? And what can I try to do? You might not want to change anything if it's a 1 and it feels great. But what about when it starts to be like a 3.5 and a 4 and a 5? One of the questions I get a lot is, does it have to be 5? No. I hope what you can take away, I think the 5 is easier and a little more concrete for everybody to understand. But the 5, I've had kids want to make their 10-point scales. It doesn't have to be 5. It's the whole idea that it's a visual, concrete system for teaching. So there's scales for problem solving in the workbook, and that would be really looking at perspective again and how one person's 4 might be another person's 2. Chad's scale. I think I have time to show you Chad. Chad is an adult. I've known him since he was a child. He has a job washing school buses. And he has a habit of asking provocative questions. He's always done this. And the older he got, the provocative questions got a little more provocative. And so he's been fired from a number of jobs because of what he says to other people. So his scale, we made this scale up, and I often go to lunch with Chad and just take him to lunch. He's just socially, and he really likes the scales. So I made this scale up, which was a 1 is great. People might even be happy if I say this or do this. A 2, other people feel okay about being with me. 3, that's unexpected behavior and people don't know what to think and it's confusing or surprising. A 4, this could be against the law if the person is afraid. You will probably get fired, and it definitely will make people angry. 5, no question, it's against the law. So he was in jeopardy of being fired because he was asking too many 3 and 4 questions of other people at work. Anyway, I'm going to show you a clip of him as he's processing. We're in a restaurant, so there is some disturbing noise in the background. There's a soundtrack here, but I think you can see what's really important is you see how he's thinking this through. And this is the 10th time we worked on this scale at lunch. And he loves to go to lunch and he loves working on scales. And we've worked on all kinds of different scales. But this particular one, this is the 10th time we had worked on it. And it's the first time that he actually really came up with some very, from a lot of his own ideas for what different behaviors and language might look like.
Is that 4 or 5? Or 3?
I think it's a 4.
Property destruction. Calling people names.
What do you think?
3.
Yeah, because why? Tell me why.
It's odd. Going to the bathroom outside, that's a 5.
Is it against the law?
What?
Is it against the law?
You could get arrested for it.
All right, put it there.
Going bathroom outside. I almost got in trouble for it once.
Please, that.
Grabbing somebody's arm.
What would you say that was?
4.
How does it make them think?
Weird.
What's that? 3, yes. Excellent.
Who was saying it was nice to see you today? Nice to see you.
That would be nice, wouldn't it? Give me another 1.
Having only 1 dessert.
Why is that a 1?
That's the right thing to do. Overeating is a 3. Sneaking desserts that's a 3. Sneaking food is a 3. Eating raw bacon, is that a 3 or 4 or 5?
What do you think?
4.
Who gets mad?
What?
Who gets mad?
My aunt or uncle would. Eating raw bacon. Or it make me very sick.
Good.
What?
They could. Can you tell me about all those numbers and what each level means?
1 is excellent and perfect. 2 is very good. Saying things, verbal praise. Saying something terrible to something else that's happened to them. Having only 1 dessert. Following rules and regulations, that's a 1. Making inappropriate phone calls, that's a 4.
Why would something be a 4?
Making inappropriate calls.
What would be an inappropriate call?
People that don't want to be called.
Okay. They've already told you not to call them?
Mhm.
And what else you got going?
Knocking somebody down, trying to hurt them, that's fine.
And that would be a 5. What about grabbing the steering wheel while we're driving?
5,
Is that a 5?
4.
Who gets upset? Okay,
Or anyone else would.
yeah, that's a 4. Because it's not necessarily against the law. You won't necessarily go to jail for that one, right? But it's very dangerous. Okay, tell me about number 3.
Somebody,
What do you mean odd?
calling out to other waitresses while they're busy.
Okay, why is it a 3? What makes it a 3?
Calling out at work when they were trying to work with someone and interrupting.
What makes that a 3?
You can't interrupt.
No, it's okay.
Can't be interrupting like that.
Okay, what is it that makes something a 3? Do you remember what we talked about? That's
Unexpected.
unexpected, exactly. So maybe it's like with somebody, when you do something that somebody's not expecting, and what do they think?
They think they're silly. You go crazy.
They might think it's a little odd, wouldn't they? Maybe. Or something's weird about it. They're not sure what to say.
Asking people if I could touch them on the boob, that's a 5.
Asking them is more like a 4. What would be a 5?
Asking if I can touch private parts.
That's a 4. It might make somebody upset, but it's not quite against the law.
Touching someone's inappropriately is a 5.
Definitely. Doing a good job with this. Is it helpful?
Say wonderful.
Okay, so that gives you an example, Chad. And then this is another book that I wrote with some people who are working at the university level with college students who are having problems succeeding at the university because of social cognitive problems. So it's just taking the 5-point scale and putting it in a little to relate to the problems that one might get when going away from home for the first time. This particular form, here's the rating 1 through 5, what is it and what's a likely outcome, looking at the dorm because this one particular student was in jeopardy of being kicked out of the dorm. So we were trying to take different issues that he had and put them on this scale so that he would know what was expected behavior at the university dorm, what was okay, what was risky, what was not okay, and what would get him kicked out for sure. So he had a problem walking naked in the hallway going to the bathroom. He never got dressed. He didn't sleep in his clothes or in pajamas, and he never got dressed when he went to the bathroom at home. So he didn't understand what the big deal was, just walking to the communal bathroom, which was down the hall from his room, naked. And he kept forgetting because everybody just told him that he couldn't do it, but nobody really took the time to break it down. So we broke it down, and this particular scale worked, at least for this particular issue. So the rating of a 1 would be walking to the bathroom in the hallway, fully dressed. And the likely outcome, this is expected dorm behavior. This is considered other people's space and feelings. 2, buying and wearing a large robe in the hallway on the way to the bathroom. And the robe should completely cover your body. Likely outcome, this is okay, and it might seem more reasonable. And remember that the robe, then getting fully dressed each time you want to go to the bathroom. And remember that the robe should only be used to go to the bathroom and not to wear in the TV lounge or the cafeteria. Wrapping a towel around your waist, tucking it into one side securely. This is risky because towels are maybe not always secure. It could open up and upset somebody. Holding a towel in front of yourself and running to the bathroom. This is a 4. It's not okay. It's offensive and upsetting. And someone's likely to report you. And a 5, walking naked in the hallway for any reason. Likely outcome, you will be asked to move out of the dorm. So this made it really concrete. We tried to stay away from anything that was like, this is wrong or this is right. Instead, just this is the way it is in the dorm. So it's sort of the 5 is against the law approach. Okay, I think I only have 15 minutes left, right, on my time? Okay, I'm probably not going to finish, but I will. I really feel like the anxiety piece is huge. And there's a lot of research in the area of anxiety. And one research study was done with firefighters. And what they found was that when firefighters, they put these heart monitors on their wrists. And what they found was when they entered a building or got to a big fire, their heart rates went way up. And what the research before that found in a laboratory situation, when a person's heart rate went above a certain rate, their thinking completely fell apart. Again, going back to Ross Green, he called it brain lock, so that no good information is coming in and you can't pull out any past experience information in order to solve the problem in the moment. So the training for firefighters, for anybody who doesn't know, is performing the same routine and response over and over and over again. They have drills and they practice those drills over and over and over again. And why they do that is because the only thing that has been found to counteract the intensity of a highly emotional, anxiety-producing event is to have already prepared by over practicing and repetitive practice. The other thing that's from the research is that in a paper called Chronic Overwhelm, which was by Daniel Goleman and Richard Davidson, they talked about when somebody loses control of their emotions, has a meltdown, just loses control. Teaching recovery or being able to recover quickly was an indicator of the best prognosis. However, we're often taught the opposite, that if somebody is losing it, then you need to let them know what they did wrong in order for them to understand why you're upset. And that flies in the face of this particular research that says, no, in fact, the best thing you can do for this person is teach them recovery, to quickly calm their body. Excuse me. And over time, they learn to control their anxiety and their responsiveness. Okay. So teaching recovery is the best thing you can do. And anxiety is huge. So this is where we really need to talk about that co-regulation thing. Anxiety is the most contagious of all human emotions. So that means that if somebody is losing control of their emotions, their anxiety is off the charts. Their anxiety can quickly infect you, especially if you are the person responsible for that person and that person's behavior. So the best thing you can do is to calm yourself and calm the situation. It is not a time to teach, and it's not a time to correct or talk. Here's another little piece of information that's really kind of important to the puzzle, and that is called neuroception. And the research in this area by Porges, Dr. Porges, he's a neuroscientist, is that we have, our brain has the ability to assess situations all the time that we are awake, to assess them for their level of danger. And most of the time we feel so secure, we're in our house or we're going to our work, and everything is fine. And so we're calm. But if we see something that we feel is dangerous, then our fight and flight, our anxiety, our need to relax or get out of there is heightened. And what he has found is that for some people, they have dysregulated or ineffective systems of neuroception. So they anticipate or not anticipate, they interpret what should be fairly safe environments as being unsafe. So fear enters the picture. And some of his students have hypothesized that perhaps that is what oppositional defiant disorder is, a disorder of neuroception, that person or those people are constantly facing fear based on the not being able to interpret the environment efficiently. And faulty neuroception means that the person's perspective is threatened, and that it can lead to fight or flight rather quickly. And you'll notice that most of the people that you work with who have explosive behavior seem to reach that level rather quickly. And this goes a long way in kind of understanding why that might be happening, and also suggests that silence and your own calm get smaller, take stress out of the situation, don't add stress to the situation. Mood induction. Mark Duran, years ago, came up with this idea for people who are highly anxious. And if you have anyone that you are living with or working with who loses control of their emotions, then they are most likely highly anxious. Starting the day, whether it is at school, at home, at school, or at work, or in the community, starting the day, and even starting different parts of the day if they have hard time holding it together for a whole day, starting the day with an enjoyable, predictable, calm activity. It's not earned, it's scheduled. So that what you're doing is you're helping this person's system remain in a calm state throughout the day. Because some people, as their day goes on, get more and more anxious because it's harder and harder to hold together all of the information and the behavior that the skills they don't have to make things go right. It's easier to fall apart as the day goes on. So even starting your day and then stopping your day mid-morning or right after lunch or before the end of the day as just a part of the schedule is just time to stop, calm down, take a deep breath, do something that you really like and you find calming as an activity. This is an easy way to use visualization through photos. We bring photos of our family to work. Excuse me. And we do that because they make us feel good. Photos of our families are calming because there's just love pouring out of them, right? And we look at photos of our family and we feel joy. We feel calm. This is my family, and this is what this slide makes me feel: very joyful and very calm. If you have somebody who is losing control of their emotions in your environment, having just a little photo book of photos of things that make them feel good, their pet, their mom, their dad, their family cabin. These things can be really calming, and that is early visualization, is the ability to do something and that can calm your brain. Okay, and I'm going to end with this, and this is a way to process the whole idea of skills and teaching skills and working with highly anxious people. And the way to program with other adults and caretakers on the team. And the idea is that you have this visual, and at the bottom of the visual where it says positive support strategies here, you list things like the 5-point scale, power cards, which I highly recommend. Those use interests to teach, social stories, relaxation, exercise, all kinds of things that you might have as part of the strategies to keep this person calm and able to learn. The other thing that anxiety talks about is when you do get to that brain lock, there's no learning going in at all. And what Ross Green says is that the words that come out at that time should be considered just verbal debris, that don't personalize them, because that person is so highly anxious, they're not really, it's not intentional thinking that's going on. Anyway, you've got all these strategies. You're teaching skills when everything is calm. Once anxiety starts entering the picture, you're going to be going up to a 2 or a 3 on the anxiety scale. That is when staff, parents, everybody should know to redirect. Redirection is a great strategy, but it does not work if the person is too highly anxious. Then they respond in a more explosive way when you try to redirect them, maybe yell at you or in some other way. They're not easy to redirect. A 4, when they're exhibiting behaviors that symbolize a 4 for this person, then you want to be quiet, calm down, be silent, let it pass, allow time and space for this person to calm their bodies. A 5 is an explosion and a 5 is too late. You just have to secure the environment and try to help bring down the anxiety level. The second half of the curve is just reminding staff and teachers, therapists, that it wasn't that losing control of your emotions is an emotional event. So that person probably needs some time to refocus. Don't try to redirect them immediately. Allow for time to calm down. Then you would take this graphic and have a team meeting, and you'd fill in all the different areas. What does this person look like when they're at a 2? Maybe they just start talking more. Maybe their voice gets louder. Maybe they come in with bags under their eyes and you just know it's going to be a rough day. A 3, what does a 3 look like? Well, maybe he starts pacing a bit or exhibiting some other behavior that leads you to believe he's a little more anxious today than he was yesterday, or a little more anxious now than he was even an hour ago. That is the important ticket to really getting a handle on how to teach the strategies and how to intervene before it's too late. When somebody is at a 4, and you'd have to decide for yourselves what that is, but your voice is going to irritate them. Trying to talk or process anything verbally is going to make it worse. So trying to understand how that might look, the final slide is just an example. And in this example, it was a boy who would get really upset and lose control of his emotions. And through an assessment, we found that he really liked listening to a book on tape. And so they used that when we decided 2 or 3 early signs of anxiety, then he could be redirected to the back of the room where they had a little listening center and he could listen to a story. When I came back later, a couple months later, to see how he was doing, they said, well, that didn't work. He ripped the tape to shreds. So this was back when we used tapes, but he ripped it to shreds. And so what it came down to as we teamed that was, well, then you gave what I hope you know what the answer is, but the answer is they gave it to him when he was at a 4. They misread him. So they needed, as a team, to go back to the drawing board and think about what are some of the things that you can observe that tell you this kid is losing control of his emotions and frustration. Okay, I think we're done with my part.
Carrie, if you still have, if you still want to keep going, we can go until 5:30. So
Oh,
it's up to you.
all right. Well, I'll just finish what I had planned here. This is on the handout, so you can read how this might look. And this would be what the planning sheet would look like after the meeting, that you just start talking about from everybody's perspective, what does this look like? What does each level look like? And it's really the 5-point scale for staff. So when things fall apart, what do? remaining calm is really, really important. So don't forget that emotions are contagious and anxiety is the most contagious of all emotions. Silence is an amazing, easy, cheap strategy. If you work with somebody, know somebody who explodes with emotion, just try silence. It's not easy because we tend to try to solve problems with our words. And, you know, even if you think about, you know, well, I know you're upset. Even that kind of words like that, I know you're upset. I know you're frustrated. Even those words can get just a blood-curdling scream response if somebody is highly anxious. So total silence in the minute after this all begins to happen is really, really important. Get small. This is, just think about that. You want to be a smaller presence, not a confrontive big presence at the time. At the same time, you are going to want to protect yourself and others, you know, anything that's breakable, you know, depending on how this person plays out. But by being silent and getting small, you're really immediately sucking some of the anxiety out of the room, which is going to help that person calm down. Afterward, really think about what went wrong. I don't think we do that enough as caregivers, thinking about our own part. And that's why I think the curve is a really good tool, because it kind of forces us to do that. Ross Green has a little system for you to use after anything goes wrong. And the first thing, it's 4 questions to ask yourselves as you gather after there's been an incident. What did he do that you wish he didn't? Or what would you like him to do differently? What skills does he need to do it that way? Or what did he do? What would you like him to do differently? What skills does he need to do it that way? And how can we teach those skills? So it's just those 4 questions to ask yourselves as a team after an incident. What that does, in whatever your system is, it takes it out of the personal bag, and behavior's personal. And yet you don't want to act and plan from a personal perspective. You want to be logical. You want to be structured in your planning. And it's hard to do that in the moment after, especially if you got bit, he threw something at you. This is upsetting. So in order to take it out of that personal box and put it into a logical thinking box, you just go through the list. What did he do that you wish he didn't? What would you rather he do? What skills does he need to do it that way? And how do we teach those skills? Avoid awfulizing, and that's the language of doom. He can't do that. He shouldn't do that. He doesn't belong here. These are awfulizing language. It's how we sometimes talk to ourselves or even at a meeting, and it gets us nowhere. It's awfulizing. It doesn't help solve the problem. It makes it worse. Okay. Okay, then I just want to talk briefly about bibliotherapy because, excuse me, because it is also, it's got a tremendous amount of research backing it up. But the more recent research in the area of neuroscience is even more exciting. And what it says is that, the neuroscience says is that when you read, or when you are read to, or when you even watch a movie, there's a character, if there's a character who has a problem similar to yours, and they solve that problem in a positive way, you can develop the part of your brain that solves problems for real. Because the same part of your brain lights up and gets busy when you're reading about that character in a functional MRI study as gets busy when you are in the middle of solving a problem in the moment. This is really important because a lot of times people who have had behavior problems their whole life and are not succeeding socially have very few social invitations and opportunities. So that part of their brain that develops social cognition and social problem solving doesn't get a lot of practice. So this is really exciting because you can take it out of the real world and actually work on that part of your brain just by reading or being read to or watching a movie. And two examples, one book, which I wrote, it's an early chapter book about a highly anxious girl, a fourth grader who has not made any friends and is not very successful with challenging behavior at school and how she solves her problems. And power cards, my friend Alyssa Gagnon wrote this quite a while ago. This is the new edition of it. And power cards, you write a story about somebody, a hero, somebody that you might really like, or some topic that you really like. It could be about a dinosaur that has a problem like yours. It could be that a champion in the area of a Rubik's Cube is who you admire. Drew Carey from The Price is Right, perhaps that's who you admire. And in that way, you write a story about Drew Carey, and he has the problem that this person has. So they read that story, and then you have a power card that reminds them of a problem-solving solution. And here's an example. This is an actual example of a student that loves Brendan Hunt, who played the coach on Ted Lasso. And here's a little story. When Brendan Hunt was 13 years old, he had trouble controlling his emotions. Sometimes Brendan would get so upset, he yelled at his friends, and sometimes he even wanted to hit other people. Brendan knew this was not a good way to keep friends or get to keep a good acting job. Brendan's teachers knew that he wanted to be funny and friendly, so they helped him learn relaxation strategies. Sometimes relaxation exercises seemed silly, but after a while, he discovered he was more relaxed and able to handle disappointment in a safe way. First, he did chair yoga for 15 minutes every morning in the resource room. Then he practiced an immediate plan for emergencies. And then their little card was a picture of Coach Brendan stretching and breathing. And then there was a list of strategies that Brendan learned in order to solve his problem, which just happened to be the same problem that we were working on with the kid. And that was sit in a chair, close your eyes, deep breath, stretch to the right, stretch to the left, deep breath, open eyes, and look for help. And that ends my part.
Thank you, Carrie.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm going to stop my share here.
All right, we're going to move now to a little video from our teen panelist. As you can all probably imagine, joining an adult education session as a teenager is a little stressful. So we're working as part of our lived experiences panel on having one of our teens, one of our youth, present and provide their voice, and that's a little stressful for young people to do. So we were able to have one of our teens do a little video for us. Anna Bina, who's been part of our youth mental health presentations in this series a couple times, was able to do an interview with our youth Wyatt Morton. We'll show that, but I will hand it over to Anna to do a little setup for a video before I show that.
Yeah, so like Amanda said, we had some really pointed Vibes Against the Law questions, because this is a youth who I have gone through the workbook with now over the past 2 years. And the student has just made a lot of progress. And so we had a lot of questions, but thinking about a neurodivergent 14-year-old, 15-year-old brain, being able to be reflective about specifically 5 Against the Law proved to be really difficult. So we kind of did a more general question of like, you've been working on some different things for a couple years now, and the primary tool being comic stripping and Vibes Against the Law. Those are the primary tools. What do you feel like has changed for you from 6th grade to 9th grade, and why it was able to really give a great answer? So we weren't able to do quite the back and forth questions that I maybe had imagined, but I think we got a good his own perception of how this has been helpful for him. So.
And I should, in the orientation of who Wyatt is, I'm Wyatt's mom, and Anna is Wyatt's support person at school. He's being paid for his time, though. At no point was he bullied into this experience. Please let me know if anyone cannot hear when I go to show this.
Okay, so a couple of years ago, we started working together, right?
Oh, I don't think I have sound. Hold on.
I think we heard sound.
Yeah,
I
we
heard
You-
sound.
Okay,
I
you
got
can
it.
hear. Okay.
Yep.
I can.
Okay, so
As
a
long as
couple
everyone
years
else-
ago, we started working together, right? And using the 5 is Against the Law language and curriculum to try to understand kind of what's going on in the school for you. And there's been changes since you were in 6th grade to now you're in 9th grade. What do you think has changed for you?
I'm less impulsive, and the 5 Against the Law thing helped me make more friends because I'm less impulsive. And I'm
Okay.
not saying like random things that would weird people out, and like being careful about what I do and say.
Okay. And that's translated into some positive relationships for you.
Yeah.
Okay. And so then, okay, so we talk a lot about not wanting to pretend, right? Or be who you are. And you're saying that you have some more impulse control. So that's translating into some peer relationships that are good, right? And so how has having those peer relationships and that information from the curriculum kind of made you feel while you're at school?
I mean, I feel less lonely, and I have more people like to watch my back, more people I can watch their backs. Like, I have people I can like have quality time with, like in person or like online. Just makes me feel better overall.
Yeah, that's great. So what do you wish that adults like knew about things that either really help at school or things that you wish could be changed from your perspective as a student?
I mean, I like being, I guess, in a class around people who really aren't that different from me. Like, I don't exactly have to like sit down, like be quiet and like pretend to be someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Not worry about being embarrassed or anything.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I know that was really brief, but that was about what we were gonna get from him on that day. But he was really flexible, and what he was referencing there at the end was there's one class during his day that's called a self-empowerment and leadership class, and it's kind of dual social language and executive function kind of study skills. It provides both. So it is the only time during the day that there are other students with IEPs in the same space. And he was kind of referencing, we talk a lot about masking and burnout and trying to really, when we're going through these scales, that it's a really affirmative thing for him of giving him that information. And I love how you said that, of that compassionate information, Carrie, of if really trying to give him the information so that he knows kind of what's might be expected in environments, what kind of how people might be perceiving his behavior, but also that like if he gets to a place where he's always doing things because it's what other people expect of him, that we might have to scale back and find a different spot so that he gets those times during his day where he's not masking and he really gets to meet his needs instead of really he's spending a lot of energy on the impulse control, as you could hear, and he's identifying that, right? And that's had really great outcomes for him. And so it's really positive, and we want to be really mindful that there's that balance for him getting what he needs. So I thought he did a really nice job kind of articulating some of that, and you could see from a youth perspective what's really important, and I thought it was great.
Harry, you can, if you want to comment, I know you haven't seen it before. So if there's anything you want to add to.
Well, I loved it. I loved it. I thought it was really, really good. And he did a wonderful job. One of the things that he said that I have heard over and over again is that ability to be with others, you know, because inclusion is a big deal. Voicing a need to be with others like himself so he can relax for a bit. And I think that's really, really important. And the masking that you brought up, really important that we're mindful of that we are aware that being in a classroom where you're supposed to be quiet and sit still and follow some organizational rules that are not easy to follow really, really takes a lot of effort and strength. And when we talk about valuing relationships, I have found that two people who share interest, even if the interest is not what other kids at that age might share, I know just the dinosaur one. I know of teens that are still super interested in all of the different things about dinosaurs, and they could probably be a paleontologist because they're so knowledgeable of it. And having somebody else who loves that to talk to, either it doesn't even matter the age. I've found that some mentors that are older, like a weather, if you have a weather channel in your area, getting a meteorologist to come and talk to somebody who is a nut about weather, just loves it. Having an ability to talk joyfully about a topic that you love is really, really a great way to kind of pump up the value of social interaction. And so even if it's just an occasional moment where you can allow somebody to, you know, meet with somebody else who has a similar love of a particular topic, that's really lovely in a social way. And it goes to the heart, I think, of what Wyatt said about being comfortable in an environment, because knowing that that people around him are accepting of who he is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amanda, how do you want us, like, do you want me just to kind of share some of my thoughts on how 5 Against the Law has impacted the students I've supported or my work? Or
Yeah,
is
go for
there, okay, I don't want to go out of turn here, but generally I was introduced to 5 Against the Law for a long time, not to 5 Against the Law. I was introduced to the incredible 5-point scale. And so thinking about it from a regulation standpoint and how do I monitor what the student is, it looks like, sounds like, feels like, right? Really trying to help. I think it pairs really well with some of that interoception work from Kelly Maher and thinking about what kind of signs do I need to be like feeling and or noticing, and then what kinds of signs can the adults who support me notice, and what do I need? As a speech therapist too, I love the advocacy in the 5-point scale, right? Of like, I need this when I feel like this. That's a really great practice from a young age and really helps veer from that idea of just like straight compliance, which I think is so important, that students feel that agency to understand themselves and ask for what they need in the environments that they want to engage in. And so I had known about it from a long time, but then a couple years ago really started using it with a couple of students. And I know it can be used in a group setting. I've used it primarily more on one-on-one. And I think, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this, Carrie, but what I have found is sometimes when I've tried to do it in even a small group, some of the students that we are supporting are neurodivergent learners who are bumping into some of these social barriers and kind of need some of that more explicit instruction, are kind of in a protective state a lot of times at school, right? They're really either they're masking or they're really working through their dysregulation, or there are so many kind of social mishaps that they don't want to appear vulnerable in front of peers. And so I haven't got as much out of students working in groups as I have one-on-one. And that's probably facilitator error on my part, but it's just kind of something that I've noticed. And so that would be one question that I would have for you, Carrie, is if you had any feedback or thoughts on that observation of mine.
Yeah, I would agree that I've gotten probably the biggest bang for my buck with one-on-one, no
Okay.
question. But I also found that gradually merging one other person is a really good strategy too, to add one person, and that it might be there, you get a lot more defensive responses early on, but
Right.
then that establishes a relationship between those two people.
Mhm.
And that is a good thing. So they can even be 2 against 1. I'm suggesting something and they're both telling me that that's not taking into their perspective into account. You know, at camp, the camp that I ran, I oftentimes would have 2 or even 3 campers who felt that something I said or something we were working on was unfair. And having them join together to tell me it's unfair was actually a really nice experience for them. And for me to not get upset about that, but to, once again, let's go back to the scale. Let's make it concrete and visual. Let's work it through. Why do you think I might be thinking that that is a 4 and you're thinking that it's a 2?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I love that. That's, yeah. Yeah, so with the one-on-one system, I just really love, or not one-on-one, but with 5 is Against the Law in general, I just love that there's that shared kind of working point. Like you said, you get to go back to that thing, and it kind of allows you to have a joint attention piece versus you're staring back at each other. Your perspective is different than my perspective. I think it's a 2 and you think it's a 4, and I think your teachers are just always overreacting, right? You know, that kind of a thing versus, okay, well, let's go back and let's look at that. Where do microaggressions fall on? That's an example used with a student recently, right? Where do microaggressions fall on that? What do you think about that, right? And we're able to talk about how, the student was really, really adamant that it was not against the law. And I said, okay, but let's look up what a microaggression is. Let's talk about it. Let's figure out, okay, it is against school policies. So inside the school, it might be like a level 5, right? It's not against the law, but we were able to kind of go back and forth. And I think without the shared already kind of system of making a scale and thinking about a scale, we would have spent even more time on differences in perspective versus kind of being able to say, okay, we've got this structure that we know we're going to use. That's going to facilitate this discussion and this learning opportunity, because it's really important to me that you are welcome in all spaces you want to be welcome. And when we use certain pieces of language, sometimes we're either, you could be fired, you get into the whole thing. I think in addition, one piece that have found to be really, really helpful is like the comic stripping idea, to really show like, well, you were thinking this and you said this. And to go back to the microaggression one, is the student said, well, nobody got upset. So I don't understand why all the teachers are making such a big deal out of it. Right. And we could draw that idea of, so you think things are a big deal. I wanted to clarify. You think things are a big deal when you see big reactions. Then it could be a big problem for you. And he said, yep. And I said, okay, but now I'm going to draw what happened yesterday. And all these students, they were silent. But do you know what they were thinking? Right. And so he was able to say no. And I said, so I don't really think that's that might not be the most helpful tool for you in understanding if something's a big problem or a little problem, right? What people are thinking, that idea of like people might feel uncomfortable. And that really allowed us to kind of move forward. So pairing those two pieces together was just an incident yesterday. That was just like in 15, and that's the other thing. I feel like I can usually kind of get kids to hang for 10 to 15-ish minutes, and then we kind of have to be done for the day. We were able to make a lot of progress and have a really, really substantial conversation using the tool. And so I think just in the last 24 hours, that is a really positive experience that we've been able to use without it being blaming, because I kept going back to like, I don't think you meant for that to be your impact. I really don't. I think you're a good kid. I think you have really great intentions. I think right? Like making sure you're really mindful of how you're presenting it. And I know you talked about that too, of like making sure you take the blame out of it and just give the information. That can be really hard for adults. And so, but anyways, I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
I think you understand the scale beautifully and you're using it perfectly. Cartooning has always been a favorite of mine as well. And one of the things that I've used it for, I used to call it create a new ending. So we'd do the cartoon, what happened, what he was thinking, what these two people here, maybe one was a teacher and one was another student. Let's guess what was in their thinking bubble. And then what happened in the end. And then you go back and where do we have to change what has to change in order to change how this person's thinking bubble looks?
Yeah.
And so it's just sort of, you can go back and there's a problem. The outcome was not very successful. It's all illustrated for you. Where do you have to go back and change? What has to change the outcome? And that is a very concrete way of problem solving. And you can do it in a very positive way without putting a lot of blame. It's just, well, let's create a new story here. How would we do that?
Yeah, I do. I love all the tools. I think they're great. Yeah.
Yes. And I also think that stories, and that's why I just wanted to mention the bibliotherapy, but that stories are a huge way to take the edge off, because as you mentioned, there's so often so much defensive nature to the problem, because the kid's been, living with maybe not even knowing what he's doing wrong, but knowing that he's not succeeding for, maybe 5 years. He's 5th grade. And it's like, for all those years, he's known he hasn't been as successful as other people. He doesn't have as many friends as they have. He knows he gets mad faster, but not understanding why and what he can do to make it different. So I think the programs, whether it's cartooning, the 5-point scale, the workbook of 5 is Against the Law, social stories, power cards, these are huge support systems for us to problem solve by taking it off of the kid and putting it into a much less judging format.
I have a sad toddler joining me all of a sudden.
Excellent. I think from a parent perspective, it's talking again about that shared language. When we moved into working with Anna and being able to have that shared language with what she was doing in school and how we were working at home, to be able to kind of have that, hey, let's check out, what do you think, where do you think this might lie in terms of, what you're saying, what you're doing, where does this hit, do you think? And to know like what that looks like when we use 5 is Against the Law, or when we're using comic stripping. I did not know what that was. That was not a tool that I was familiar with, but I know that he was really wildly into comic books. And so we just started like let's do comics like what you read. And then we got introduced to comic stripping through Anna. It's like, okay, we're using a tool that's actually legitimate. And so that was really helpful. So having those kind of underlying tools and continuing to use something that's similar at school, at home, was really nice. And now I think that the flip side of that is, even as my son's, 14 going on to 15, for him to be able to say, kind of like check back the way you're talking with your camp kids, when he says things, back to me, like, I don't know that is as big of a deal as you think it is. I think that's a 3. I don't think I agree with what you're saying. And so then we can have, like a grounding about, and sometimes I have to like relook at what I'm saying or doing and realize, actually, this is more of my issue. And I'm not realizing that the other like if I think back to your conversation about when they get really excited, they're meeting somebody that they have a shared interest, and a conversation is going really, really long, and I might be frustrated. Like, this is not my shared interest, and I want to get going. But he's really connecting with somebody and having a great time. Is it really that big of a deal if I just find a space, go sit and have a cup of coffee? Do we really need to go right now? Or can he have another 10, 15 minutes to connect with this person? Because that person is enjoying the conversation. He finds my son really interesting. That he's, for being as young as he is, that he has as much knowledge or craft about whatever it is they're talking about. And being able to like recognize that actually I'm wrong in this situation. He's not being odd or inappropriate or weird. Like, he's actually connected socially well. And so like being able to have those conversations back and forth now that he's older and he has the language, to be able to say that, no, Mom, that wasn't a 3. I wasn't being weird. I know now, like I know how to do that. So I think that now he's getting really competent with that. And we're checking back and forth with each other, now that he's been doing that for a couple of years. And so I can see, not only has it helped him to socially connect in ways, he's now taking hold of it, advocating for himself in the way that I would want him to do, and gaining strengths with that. And I think the only other thing I would want to say, to providers who are using tools like this, is that reminder that it is really slow progress. This sense that, that sometimes as parents, as caregivers, as providers, these idea that these tools, that they're going to learn these tools and then they're quote unquote fixed, and that's not fair. That these are things that, the scaffolding that takes a long time, and new situations and encountering life experience, that just takes time and patience for everybody involved. And just to remember those things as well. I think sometimes it's just kind of holding on to those kinds of ideas, and giving yourself and young people space to do that, and not think, well, you've been doing it for a year now, why aren't they different or better? And that's not fair.
Good points. I think those are really good points. I also think that it kind of goes, the whole idea of taking it with you to different environments. I mean, just demonstrating where he used it at school and where you used it at home. You can also take that into a later environment, into the work environment, or into a new school environment. It's very nicely generalized in other areas, as long as whoever the teacher, therapist, or caregiver is understands it as well, and how to use it effectively. Yeah, I like that.
And I like that there's room in it, and I think we kind of touched on it before, but there's room in it for validating, clarifying, identifying the autistic person's perspective. So many social skills curriculums don't do that. And that is why as somebody who's trying really hard to be affirming and supportive and responsive to the autistic community, I'm really like picky about what things I use or want to talk about. And I like to talk about your program, like 5 is Against the Law, as much as possible, because I think, again, it goes to that compassionate clarity and there still allows for that conversation of perspective to say, that isn't my perspective, Mom. In this moment, we were really connecting, and that was for us, that was a 1, maybe it went on for a little too long. He started to yawn. Maybe it was a 2, but it wasn't weird. It wasn't, and you're able to really and say like, you're right. Or like say that like for me, no one reacted. And so I really thought it was not a big deal. Like that really allows me like, oh, wow, that's really good information. I know how to build on that skill or what kind of additional information you need versus saying like, you were wrong. It's a 4, it's a 5. Like there's like no questions asked. And they're in terms of like if we want to use microaggressions, like it kind of is a policy that there's no really room for that to continue in the school, right? Like I do want the student to know that, but how we get there comes from a very compassionate lens of building skill versus consequence and punishment. And I think so often that's the part that's missed. And if we hadn't done that conversation yesterday, I believe that more of the same would have continued, right? The consequence wouldn't have mattered. It wouldn't have built the skill or taught the skill. So that's one thing that I just think really value and appreciate from Incredible 5-point scale, 5s against the law, of allowing there to be some student perspective.
Yeah. Good.
I think that's all my notes of things I wanted to make sure I didn't forget to say today.
Well, I'm gonna throw up our last poll. I know we're getting late. We've got till 6:15. But I know it gets late for people. And before we lose too many of our attendees, if people would just take a minute to answer our final poll there as far as impact for our final session. This will be our final topic session. We do have one more, the part 2 from yesterday on digital consent will be in March. It'll be a couple weeks out yet, and that will conclude our youth mental health and social success series. As we're doing that, if you have questions for Carrie or Anna or myself, please feel free to pop those in the chat, unmute, ask us anything you got. I'll close the poll in a minute here. That second question's more reflective.
Those of y'all who can complete the poll, please do. It's really, really helpful for us.
Excellent, appreciate that.
I think that's it. I'm gonna close the poll.
Thank you. All right, as you thinking of your questions, I'm gonna go ahead and do our concluding slides. As a reminder, just taking a second to get up there. Please feel free to email us your full name and email address if you came through not through the registration. So if you registered through Zoom, you're fine. We've got you. If you didn't, just email us and we'll make sure you get your certificate of attendance so you can get your contact hours and that we make sure that you get signed up for our newsletter. Next, if you could please complete the Qualtrics survey. It takes about 5 to 7 minutes. I know everyone's busy. That also helps us give feedback to our presenters and know what else you're looking for as far as professional development coming into the future months. At least those first 5 questions is very, very helpful. So you can scan the QR code or we'll pop the link into the chat. And then last but not least, the next 2 sessions we have coming up to conclude February are the next 2 in the Know Your Resources series. We'll be featuring the opioid response networks on Monday, from 10 to 11. And the Wisconsin Office of Children's Mental Health will be doing a session on Thursday, February 29th. And we hope you can join us. They will be featured from 11 to noon Central Time. And that's all we have for you for tonight. Again, if you'd like to stay on and ask any questions of Carrie or Anna, otherwise that's all we got.